right, so we're going to talk about how do you determine if lines are parallel, perpendicular, depending on what the slope says, okay? So to start off, parallel lines, they're going to have the same slope. Means exactly the same. Signs the same, everything, okay? Now, perpendicular lines have the opposite reciprocal slope, okay? So let's go back to some of our vocabulary from algebra. What is a reciprocal? Anybody remember? Well, reciprocal is just flip the fraction, whatever it is. So what would be the reciprocal of 2/3? 3/2, right? All we're doing is flipping it. What would be the reciprocal of 4? 1/4. So we get the idea, right? So the reciprocal is just to flip the fraction. And then here, when I say the opposite reciprocal, it means change the sign on it and flip it. Does that make sense? Yeah, so if it's positive, make it negative, and if it's negative, make it positive. Does that make sense to everybody? Cool. All right, so right here we say, let's find the negative reciprocals, or what I've been calling them, opposite reciprocals, okay? So if we start with 3/4, what would the opposite reciprocal of 3/4 be? -4/3, okay? And now what would the opposite reciprocal be of 2? -1/2. Yes. Okay. Okay, so good question. And students do have this question about like when it's a negative, where does it go? And so one negative, so it could be -1/2 is the same thing as 1/2 is the same thing as if I just put the negative sign to match up over there. It's all the same, okay? Now, if there's two negatives, the top and the bottom are negative, what really is that? That's really a positive number, okay? All right, so in example 3, what would be the opposite reciprocal of -7/8? +8/7, okay? And what would be the opposite reciprocal of 1? -1. All right, so then what would be the opposite reciprocal of 0? No. No. Okay. Huh? It would be undefined. And so let's show this. Anything, you get a whole number, and you can just place it over 1, right? And so then to do this, I would have to flip it, right? So it'd be 1/0 and then negative. Can you have 0 in the denominator? No. So anytime you have 0 in the denominator, that is going to come up as undefined. So if you have a line with 0 slope, the opposite reciprocal one would be one that is undefined. Okay? Huh? I'm not sure what does the decimal say error? Yeah, I know the TIs will tell you error. Can some you have decimals up real quick? So just put like 1 divided by 0. What does it say? And it'll tell, so the decimals calculator will tell you undefined. If you use a TI calculator, it will say error. Either way, if it's 0 in the denominator, that is an undefined slope. So let's try to go back. What type of line has a 0 slope? Meaning it has 0 rise, but it runs. It's a horizontal line, right? And what type of line is undefined? It's a vertical, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? All right, we're okay with that? Okay, so now these problems right here, we're going to use slope to determine if lines A and B and C and D are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So for them to be parallel, they have to be exactly the same. In order for them to be perpendicular, they have to be opposite reciprocals. Can they just be reciprocals? No, they have to be opposite reciprocals. And then if it's neither one of those, they're not the same or they're not opposite reciprocals, then they'll be neither. Okay? And remember that 0 and undefined are opposite reciprocals of each other. Okay? So, and it's going to be a little tedious a little bit, but it's practice work with slope. So for number 1, we need to find the slope of AB. So remember, to get slope, you subtract the y's over subtract the x's. So I'll have minus 3 over 2 minus negative 2. And do you always simplify? Always. So this becomes 3 over 4, and that one's simplified. So the slope of AB is 3 over 4. Okay. Now let's find the slope of CD. Okay, so now we're going to do 3 minus 0 over 3 minus negative 1. So 3 minus 0 is 3. 3 minus negative 1 is 4. So the slope of CD is 3/4. They're parallel because they both have the same slope of 3/4. So what type of lines are they? They're parallel. Remember, that's the symbol for parallel. Any questions so far? Okay, so you do number 2, find the slopes, and then we'll determine what we're dealing with. So if you look at this one, once I found the slope of AB and CD, because they're opposite reciprocals, we know that these lines are perpendicular. And so remember, that's the symbol for perpendicular. Okay. All right, let's try number 3. Go ahead and find the slope of AB, find the slope of CD, and then let's determine what type of lines we have. All right, so because they both have a slope of 2, you have parallel lines. So let's try number 4. Go ahead and find the slope of AB and CD. All right, so for AB, you get a slope of negative 2/3. For a slope of CD, you get 1/4. So they're not the same. They're not opposite reciprocals. So then what can we say? They're neither. Okay, you have that as an option. It's either parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Okay. All right, let's do 5. Find the slope of AB and CD. All right, so hopefully you got that the slope of AB is negative 1/3 and the slope of CD is 3. So what type of lines do we have? We have perpendicular because these slopes are opposite reciprocals. Okay, so that would be perpendicular. All right, so if I have a slope of 2/5 and I have a slope of 5/2, what type of lines do I have? They're neither. Why? Because the signs aren't different, right? Yes, they're reciprocal, but it's not the opposite reciprocal. Okay, so these would be neither. And so you got to pay attention to that because I know the neither on the sheet was very like 2 different slopes. But a lot of times what you're going to get is they're going to be close, but they either just changed the sign but didn't flip, or they flipped and didn't change the sign, and you need to understand that those are not perpendicular. Does that make sense? Okay. So go ahead for this one. It's not on your paper, but just somewhere scratch. Find the slope of AB and then find the slope of CD. All right, so when we work out the slope of AB, we get 9 over 0. You never leave it with a 0 in the denominator or a 0 in the numerator. You need to tell me what that means. So what is actually 9 over 0? That's undefined. And if you can't remember if 0 is in the denominator or numerator and which one gives you undefined, put it in the calculator and let them tell you. Okay? But if you leave it as this, a lot of times you will not be able to determine if they're parallel, perpendicular, or neither. And if I ask you for slope, just find the slope, and you leave me with 9 over 0, I am going to mark it wrong because I'm going to say you don't know what you're looking for. Does that make sense? All right, so we know that 9 over 0 for AB is really undefined. And then how about this one? 0 over 3, 0. And you need to tell me it's 0. If you leave it as 0 over 3, I'm going to mark it wrong. Understood? Okay, so now if AB has a slope of undefined and CD has a slope of 0, what type of lines are they? They are perpendicular to each other. Because think about it, what type of line is undefined? It's a vertical line, so that looks like that, right? And then what type of line is a slope of 0? It's a horizontal line. Wouldn't those cross at a 90-degree angle? Okay, cool. Now look at number 12. Go find the slopes of AB and CD. All right, so you have a slope for AB, which is -5 over 0. But remember, I don't want you to just leave zeros in numerators or denominators. So what is -5 over 0? That's an undefined slope. Okay, and then for CD, you get, what is that, 4 over 0, which is also undefined. And so sometimes if students don't make this clear that these are undefined, then it's hard for them to find the relationship, okay? So now what type of lines do we have? They're parallel because they both have undefined slopes. Yes, they both have different numbers in the numerator. Doesn't matter. Those are undefined slopes. Okay? So if you're all good, you can glue this into your spiral.